Surrounded by the ocean, Japan is a mountainous island nation. The rhythm of the changing seasons, of heaven and earth, has yielded the rich blessings of nature, but on occasion, misfortune. The Japanese believe that gods dwell throughout nature, in the mountains, rivers, oceans, forests, and trees. They respect nature, appreciating and coexisting with its awesome power. Learning from nature, a unique aesthetic awareness was born, with refined sensibilities and a dedication to craftsmanship. This is the cornerstone of Japan's manufacturing prowess. One of Japan's most sophisticated products is sake. Ancient brewers used microscopic yeast, producing sake, a blessing of the gods, from water and rice. Sake was created and developed in Hyogo Prefecture. Even today, the prefecture is famous for its sake, with sake produced in different regions. Hyogo Prefecture is vast, stretching from the Sea of Japan to the Seto Inland Sea. Its 5 regions have different climates and topographies, and varying characteristics. Hyogo Prefecture's natural conditions are ideal for sake brewing. Many fermented foods, sake, soy sauce, miso, and mirin, are produced here in the region called Harima. It is believed to be one of the birthplaces of Japanese sake. Harima is also home to Niwata Shrine. Harima no Kuni Fudoki, an ancient historical record dating back to around 715 AD, contains an account of sake made from fermented rice being offered to the gods and used in a feast held at Niwata Shrine. At the time, sake was called dakushu because of its cloudy white appearance. It would take time for modern refined seishu sake to be produced. The city of Itami in Hyogo's Setsu region is thought to be the birthplace of refined sake. It's said that during the early Edo period, Yamanaka Shinnoku Yukimoto developed new techniques to brew large quantities of clear sake, which differed from existing styles. Sake from Itami spread to Edo, modern-day Tokyo, where it quickly became popular. The brewing techniques arrived in Nara near the Seto Inland Sea from the mid-Edo period. Nara has the perfect conditions to produce the water and rice needed for sake brewing. Brewing techniques were steadily refined to take advantage of these ingredients. One of Nara's natural blessings is towering Mount Roko, located to the north. The spring water that flows from Roko is called Miyamizu and contains an ideal balance of minerals thanks to the area's unique terrain. During the Edo period, Yamamura Tazaemon VI found that different water affected sake's taste. Miyamizu came to be known as the best water for brewing sake. The Roko Oroshi winds, blowing from the mountains in winter, suppress bacterial growth, stabilizing the quality of sake. The flow of water is also used to power water wheels for milling rice. The land basin near Mount Roko is used to cultivate rice that is ideal for sake brewing. Sake brewing was originally performed by chief brewers known as Toji, who traveled from Tajima and Tamba in northern Hyogo Prefecture. The area's deep snow meant that agriculture was not possible in winter. Instead, sake was brewed, and the brewing techniques were handed down through the generations. Sake made in Nara, which faces the sea, was transported directly from the port to Edo. It was praised for its high quality and became known throughout Japan. With their varied climates and rugged terrain, each of Hyogo's historical districts has unique local food culture, nurturing a wide variety of cuisines. For example, famed Kobe beef is bred in Tajima. Fish and seafood are caught in the fast-flowing waters of Awaji and Harima. Local breweries produce sake that suits each region's diverse ingredients. These different varieties are yet another characteristic of Hyogo Prefecture. Rice is an essential ingredient for sake brewing. Hyogo is the birthplace of Yamada Nishiki, the king of sake rice. But it also grows a wide variety of other sake rice as well. Yamada Nishiki was first developed by the prefecture's agricultural experiment station in 1936. Compared to other regions, the soil in northeastern Harima has a high-quality layer of clay. Together with the varying temperatures of the land basin, it helps to produce Yamada Nishiki of the highest quality. Rice from here is sought by breweries throughout Japan. Hyogo is proud to be #1 in both the amount of sake brewed and in sake rice production. Hyogo, the birthplace of sake. Hyogo is blessed with a climate suitable for sake brewing, as well as high-quality water and rice. Sake brewing is supported by those with a spirit of dedication that is still alive today. Some help maintain the genetic purity of rice, ensuring that its special characteristics are retained. Others are trying to revive Niwazake, the first ever sake made from ancient yeast. Or are involved in conservation to protect the quality of Miyamizu water. Yet others train artisans to make wooden tools and brew sake using traditional methods. All are working to pass on this unique culture to future generations. They are proud to brew sake and to fulfill their roles. That's how sake is made in Hyogo. Hyogo, the home of sake. Traditional local methods will continue to be passed on to innovative new generations of sake brewers.
Hello. Hi, everyone. So we now have 35 people. So hello, everyone. My name is Yuko Saikawa. Welcome to today's Japanese sake webinar. Before we get started, I would like to let you know a couple of things. This event is presented by Hyogo Business and Cultural Center, and it will be recorded and screenshot by them during the seminar. It will be published on their website or SNS and their YouTube channel. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your question into the chat box. You may send in your question anytime during the presentation. We will do the best to address them at the end of the seminar as much as possible. And please turn on the camera if you don't mind. We are happy to see your face. Well, most of people already knew him, but I'd like to introduce our sake master, Marcus Baxter. He is based in Portland, Oregon. Marcus has over 30 years of experience in sake production, sales, and education, and is America's most enthusiastic and knowledgeable sake champion. Marcus was awarded the title of Sake Samurai by Japanese Brewing and Shochu Association, and the international award held by fewer than 50 people worldwide. He has been very busy educating people in the restaurant and beverage industry in the US, and today he will quickly review what we have learned in our previous seminar. Marcus, are you ready?
I'm ready. Thank you so much, Yuko-san. Hello, everyone. I hope you're ready for a great presentation tonight. This is our second one of a series of 4. I'm going to just review briefly what we talked about last time, which was kind of a basics on sake, some sake 101, if you will, some interesting facts. So let me just go over those for a couple minutes, and we'll jump into our presentation tonight. So as I talked about last week, sake is brewed, sake is not distilled. Sake, and let's talk about this too. Let's just practice at your home or wherever you are. Please say the word S-A-K-E. Yes, I think you all said it correctly. It's pronounced sake, not sake. It's critical we teach the rest of the planet how to say this easy 4-letter word called sake. I know it seems simple, but honestly, I hear it every day. People call it sake, and it hurts my ears. I'm sure it probably hurts your ears too. So help me teach the rest of the planet how to say this great word called sake. And also, sake is gluten-free. Sake is sulfite-free. Sake is not rice wine. We talked about last time, wine fermentation is kind of a simple fermentation. I'm not saying it's simple to make wine, but the fermentation process is simple, where you just have sugar and grapes, and then you have a yeast, and then that will convert to alcohol. Beer doesn't work that way. You have to do a malting process first, and then you have to, after the malting process, move it to a different tank and then introduce the yeast to convert that to alcohol. Sake is more complex. The starch of the rice will not convert to alcohol on its own, so you have to hand make what's called koji. And every producer takes great pride in the koji that they make. It takes 2 days. So they make a koji rice, about 15% of the total volume. The koji rice transforms the starch of the regular steamed rice into glucose. Then the yeast, which is in there at the same time, on the same tank, simultaneously is changing the glucose into alcohol, called dual fermentation or multi-parallel fermentation. Only product on the planet that does that. So it makes sake more complex. So it's not rice beer, it's not rice wine. Sake is sake. After you've opened a bottle of sake, it will last for a very long time. Depends on the sake, but most sakes will last for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And you don't have to consume it in 2 or 3 days like you do wine. If you do, that's great too. But you have time with it. And play around with some. We're going to be, talking about sake and food throughout all three seminars. And have it with things outside of sushi. Try it with other things, and you'll see what I mean. I was promoting sake and cheese last week, so try it with your cheese pizza or pepperoni pizza or something like that. So anyway, I just wanted you to know that it's very versatile. It's It's a wonderful beverage, and the sake is also made from a variety of different types of sake rice. And as I mentioned in the video, Hyogo Prefecture is the #1 producer of sake rice as well as sake. A lot of different types of rice comes from Hyogo, but most notable is the Yamada Nishiki, the king of sake rice. So remember that, and I think that's probably great for a review. So anyway, again, as we mentioned, if you have questions for the presenter tonight, for Sarah, please go ahead and type those in the chat, and then we will address those later on. So thank you very much, Yuko-san. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Marcus. Now, I'd like to introduce Sarah Gyokiti as today's main instructor. She has been working at the Yaegaki USA since 2018 as a territory sales representative of the West Coast. In the spring of 2019, Sarah was invited to visit the Yaegaki headquarters in Himeji, Hyogo Prefecture, and see firsthand the agricultural resources and brewing methods that Yaegaki has been using for over 350 years. Sarah is enthusiastic about demystifying sake to Americans and sharing its versatility in both taste and pairing. Previous to Yaegaki, Sarah worked in Japan for over 11 years as an English teacher in both the Kyushu and Hyogo. She holds a certified sake advisor qualification from Sake School of America. Sarah-san, are you ready? お願いします。
Yes, I'm ready. Hi, thank you, Yuko-san. Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be sharing this evening with you, and I'm really honored to have been asked to speak with you tonight about sake. So I am in the unique position of working for a company that does have its base in Hyogo Prefecture, Japan, in Hyogo, in Himeji, sorry. And then also here in Los Angeles, we also brew. So we have those two bases. As Yuko-san mentioned, I am a sales rep here on the West Coast. And I always joke when people ask how I got into sake. So when I lived in Japan, I didn't particularly know too much about sake, but I was an English teacher. So I always joke that I did keep up with my alcohol consumption regardless post teaching hours. So when I came back to the States, I was able to sort of join, you know, my enthusiasm for alcohol with my love of Japanese culture. So it's been a great experience working for Yaegaki. I asked a question in the chat where everyone's joining from. So a few people have answered. It looks like we have people from New York, Okinawa, Utah, as well as Seattle, of course. If anyone else wants to type in where they're coming from, that would be awesome. Pretty diverse group. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in and share my screen. You cannot share. Okay, so it looks like Mira, I'm not able to share at the moment because someone else is sharing. There we go. Thank you. And as Marcus mentioned, if there's any questions along the way, I don't mind being interrupted. Go for it. Unmute yourself. Or else put it in the chat is perfectly fine as well. So can everyone see my presentation? Great, thank you. So today we're talking about sake made in the US versus Japan. As you can see on the screen, these are some of Yaegaki's domestic and international products. So I'll just introduce our company to start. As I mentioned, we do have a base in Japan. It's in Himeji. It's about a 1-hour bus ride north of Himeji City, for those of you who are familiar with the beautiful castle in Himeji. And then we also have a location in Los Angeles. I saw somebody's in Orange County, so we have some California people here. It's in Vernon, not Vernon Prefecture, it's in Vernon, which is an area, industrial area of Los Angeles that is about 2 miles south of Little Tokyo. So it's, you know, it's right there in downtown where we're brewing here in the US. A few things about our company. So you'll notice on my slides up in the right corner, there'll either be a Japanese flag or a California flag to let you know which place I'm talking about, just a little note for you. So our brewery in Japan was founded in 1666, which is pretty crazy how long ago that was, in present-day Himeji. We have over 350 years of history and a tradition of using handcrafted brewing techniques. And actually, I was talking to our present-day CEO. So he is Yusuke Hasegawa. He is the 15th generation. He is in the 15th generation of this brewery in their lineage, which is pretty amazing. And I learned that actually the company started out as both a timber company and a sake company. And I think it was the third generation that it actually split into two, and the timber company did not survive, but the sake brewery has. And he did let me know that Yaegaki is the 55th oldest brewery out of about over 1,000 breweries that are still active in Japan. So even in a country where they have a really long old history, we're still pretty up there with being the old 55 out of 1,000. And then last, you can see we have solidified our position, receiving some various awards, and definitely the Musake, which some of you probably are familiar with. If you aren't, maybe you bought it to try tonight, is one of our most awarded of sakes that's been around for about 30 years. As far as our US base, it started out as a joint venture in 1987. And then in 1999, it became Yaegaki Corporation of the United States. So here domestically in LA, we do have close to 35 years of experience of brewing as well. And we do use those same traditional techniques from Japan, but just on a larger scale. You can see I have a type, well, I don't know if that's a typo. And then lastly, Yaegaki's traditional handcrafted sake techniques have been passed down, and we're able to provide those to a wide variety of consumers using that large production facility that you saw in the first picture of our brewery. So I do have a short video. I'm just going to try to be aware of the time. I do have a short video to show you, but I think I'm going to go ahead and leave that to the end if we have extra time, because we already saw a video in the beginning. So I've been tasked to talk about what are the differences between brewing sake in Japan and in the United States. So of course, we have to start with the rice. I've been told that unlike wine is more about the agriculture. Sake is definitely more about the chemistry. And I think Marcus talked about this in his first segment, in the first seminar rather, that it really is about the talent of the brewmaster, the techniques, and the knowledge that the brewmaster, known as the toji, brings to making sake. The rice is of course important, but I've been told it's not as important as grapes are to wine per se. But we will start with the rice because it does matter. So here in California, we are using Calrose. So you can see over on the right-hand side, there's a picture of the Botan. There's other brands as well. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this Calrose rice. It's one of the most popular rice varieties that's being grown domestically and used. This was the founding variety of California rice industry in 1948. It is a medium grain rice. It makes perfect sticky rice for your sushi and your onigiri and those kind of things. So I'm sure a lot of you have used it and tried it before. And we're also using it to make sake. And 80% of the rice grown in California is actually Calrose. Anybody in the chat? Let me look at the chat real quick. Anybody eat Calrose or buy Calrose here? I'm such a teacher. I like some interaction, so I'm always like checking out the chat. Okay, so moving on. We're gonna talk about the terroir. That's a hard word for me, so trust me, I put the parentheses for myself. Terroir. Let's all say it together, even though you're muted. Terroir. And this literally translates as earth or soil. It's a French word, and it's mostly known in the wine world, but it's also been used for other kind of agricultural goods. And it talks about the unique characteristics of that place. So I've been asked to talk about what makes Sacramento so good for growing Japanese rice. It might be surprising at first because we think of California as being quite a dry state. It's like a rice paddy, Northern California. How did that happen? So a lot of the Calrose rice is grown in the Sacramento San Joaquin River Delta. This is a very special area there in Northern California, Central California. You can see on the map, it's maybe about 2 hours east of San Francisco City. So this area, of course, like all of California, has abundant sunshine, which is necessary during the growing season, those 4 months, June, July, August, September. It does have the hot days and the cool nights, just like wine grapes. This is also conducive for the rice cultivation, very important. And it has a clay-like soil that comes from the peat. It's actually something called peat that was created 10,000 years ago from different organic matter, plants and animals dying and condensing and creating this really compact peat, and also clay soil that helps hold in the moisture. So even though maybe California doesn't get as much rain, this clay soil helps to support the rice stalks and also keep the moisture in. So that's quite unique. And you can see from the picture, all the different, we'll have a better picture of all the different the rivers and sloughs, but those of course are what we use to flood the rice paddies. I say we, I've actually never gotten to do it myself, not yet. And then the Delta Islands have access to 700 miles of fresh water from the rivers and sloughs fed by both the Sierra Nevada and the Southern Cascade Mountain ranges. So we are getting some of that. So they are getting some of that natural water source from the mountains. A coworker today also let me know, he actually, my two colleagues got to go up and visit this area, this rice growing area of Sacramento, that Niigata City and Sacramento are actually basically at the same latitude, you can see here, which means they do share a similar climate. And as many of you probably know, Niigata is a really famous sake area and also rice growing area, especially sake rice growing area. So they have a similar climate, which makes sense that they're both good for growing sake rice, or rice for that matter. Here you can see a picture on the left. This is a rice farmer walking along the flooded rice fields in the Sacramento Valley. And beyond growing rice, this area is also known for grapes, tomatoes, sugar beets, cotton, and a multitude of other fruits and vegetables. And it's one of the few regions that's able to grow the sticky sushi rice, the medium grain rice. It's particularly good for that. On the right, you can see the waterways I was talking about earlier. There is something interesting too that I found out about sustainability in this area. So this was in an article that I read online in a Sacramento journal in 2001. And they were talking about, I have to look up the word here, subsidence. So it's the sinking of the land that's happening here in the river delta. And how when that happens, the peat, which has all that organic compounds and a lot of carbon, once it's plowed or it dries up, it's releasing those greenhouse gases into the earth, into the environment, including CO2. And of course, this is a bad thing. So one way some of the rice farmers are joining with the environmental activists, or the environmental planning, I should say, is to actually increase their rice farming, because this is one way to support local agriculture there, but also to fight this subsidence and keep those CO2 gases from being released. So it's kind of a double, a twofer there, which is great. So we talked about the rice that we use in California. We do use another variety that I'll talk about later, but it's basically Calrose is what we're using in our domestic sake. So now we go to Japan, and we're using Yamada Nishiki that's grown locally. So Hyogo Prefecture, I think it was mentioned in the first video that you guys got to watch, is the prefecture home is to Yamada Nishiki, which is known as the king of sake rice. So I have a feeling quite a few of you are familiar with Yamada Nishiki. Has everyone tried Yamada Nishiki or are familiar with the word? I'm kind of assuming if you're here, you've heard it, right? So as I mentioned, Hyogo Prefecture is the home of Yamada Nishiki. It was created in 1936, crossbred between two rice strains, Yamada Ho and Tankan Wataribune. It was designed so that it has a large starchy core that's known as shimpaku, that starchy core. And you can see on the right, the picture, kind of X-ray picture of that large starchy core, which of course brewmasters love because, as Marcus mentioned earlier, it's the starch that's going to convert to sugar, which we're going to convert to alcohol. So that's what we want. Another reason brewmasters like the Yamada Nishiki, it's very predictable. It's known to bring a breadth and depth of flavors that blend harmoniously. So it is really lovely in something that has a lot of flavor, such as a Daigenjo or Ginjo. And lastly, 60% of Yamada Nishiki rice is grown in Hyogo Prefecture. So other prefectures do cultivate it, but sort of the creme de la creme is known to come from Hyogo Prefecture. Stop. There we go. So we talked about the terroir of California and Sacramento. Let's go to Hyogo Prefecture. Most of you are probably familiar. It's in Kansai, and you can see in the red, it's right there, sort of in, kind of in the center, it's a little bit west. It's a very large prefecture, and it does span from the Japan Sea all the way down to, what is that called? The Seto Inland Sea, is that right? Or is that the Pacific? I think it's the Seto Inland Sea. Correct me if I'm wrong, please. So what is the climate of Hyogo Prefecture like? Well, they have a lot of mountainous areas like most of Japan, similar to Sacramento and California. It's going to have those warm days, but also the cool nighttime temperatures, which make it good for rice cultivation. A lot of precipitation, 60 inches of rain annually. So of course, that humidity and rain make a difference in the growing of the rice. It has a nutrient-rich soil. And just like Sacramento's and San Joaquin River Delta, they also have that clay-like soil, which supports the tall and vulnerable rice stalks as they grow. So Yamada Nishiki does grow taller. It does have a larger grain that becomes heavy. It is a cumbersome rice to grow. It takes a lot more work and effort. It's more expensive to grow. So that's one reason why it's more precious and why more expensive, basically. Here's a picture of Yamada Nishiki rice fields in Baonshu. It's an area in Himeji, Hyogo Prefecture. This was the off season. So on the right, you can see me and my coworker are there with some of the local rice farmers. It was the off season because it was end of February. But you can see on the left sort of that clay-like soil you can imagine. And then it is a little bit elevated the way they grow it in order to protect it from the environment, like the wind and things like that. Let me just check. Oh, great. Marcus told me Seto Inland Sea is correct. Yes, I nailed it. So moving on to water, we talked about rice. Another important element is going to be the water. So when we talk about making sake, hard and soft water always comes up. And Miyamizu, one of the sakes that was talked about in that introductory video, that is a hard water from Nara, I believe, the area in Kobe. Nara is part of Kobe. That's known to make more of a drier sake, a more robust sake because of the hardness. California's water is even harder than Miyamizu for sure. So America is known to have on the harder side of water, not as hard as some parts of Europe, but definitely in comparison to Japan, America's water is harder. You can see 100 to 300 particles. Let me get to my notes here. Particles per million, or parts per million, I'm sorry. And Los Angeles is known to have a harder water as well, 127 ppms. So my Orange County people, you might know, like you get a lot of scum and like your, I don't know if scum is the right word, but right, your faucet and your shower, there's always like all this buildup because the water is hard and it has a lot of the minerals such as calcium and magnesium that, you know, make our showers and bathtubs messy. So why is water harder in the United States, or especially here in California? It's going to be because of the hot weather and the lack of rainfall. When we look at Japan, you can see, although there is variation, of course, like they mentioned in the video, Compared to the rest of the world, it is considered to be on the softer side, less than 90 ppms. Some of the reasons are because, again, the mountains make up 75% of Japan's topography. This creates a natural filtration and the water source. And then also the geography. So Japan gets those cold airs coming from Siberia. The snow melts and it provides them that clean water that the breweries are blessed with. So I was told when I visited Japan, it's no mistake that breweries, 350 years ago popped up around fresh water sources. So there's a correlation, of course. Oh, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, but so in our California production, of course, here in Los Angeles, we use filtration and we use something called ion exchange in order to soften the water. And we do our best to make it comparative to what we're using in Japan. But in general, when you have harder water, it does accelerate the fermentation. It gives those minerals, give something for the yeast to eat. And it tends to accelerate the fermentation, which leads to a more fuller, robust sake and definitely a drier sake. In comparison, when the water's softer, the fermentation is going to be a little bit slower and it can lead to a more gentle fermentation. It can be sweeter and a slower fermentation, so to speak. So we've talked about the water and the rice and the climate quite a bit. How does it affect the characteristics and the taste? So here's a little chart, a few things we did talk about, but just to expand a little bit more about the rice. So the climate is going to affect the rice here in California. It is just without a doubt a lot drier than Japan. So the individual grains of the rice, even after we wash and steam them, after they're polished, they are harder, and it is harder for that kojikin, that mold, to penetrate and start that initial fermentation process. So we do have to adapt how we make our koji here in California for sure, compared to Japan. In Japan, it's a humid climate, so you are going to have some softer rice grains. It's easier for the kojikin to permeate and to penetrate more uniformly and more thoroughly, which you could say maybe does help with a bit of the depth of flavor. The water, we already talked about, the harder water is going to accelerate fermentation. It can yield a fuller, drier sake, whereas softer water is going to be a lighter, sweeter sake, but of course there's varieties in both. We can't miss the climate differences as well. So Japan has 4 seasons. As most of you probably know, the brewing season does begin sometime around September and ends around the beginning of March. And they really only brew in those cold months. Otherwise, there's just too much humidity. It's too hot. Here in California, we are blessed with sunshine and 76 degrees every single day. So that brings a challenge actually for the fermentation, cooling the tanks and controlling the temperature. And it is a quicker fermentation than Japan just because of the weather. So it does yield a drier sake with a higher acidity typically. And these are all generalities, but that's what we founded our 2 breweries. Our brewery in Japan, in the summer, they actually make shochu, which was my first love coming from Kyushu. Any other shochu fans here? Go ahead and put it in the chat if you're a shochu drinker. And furthermore, if you know what imojochu is, then we're going to be friends. And lastly, preference. So I talked to our brewmaster here in America, and they have worked, the Tojis, which I'll introduce next, they have worked together to really adapt a sake that sells well in the States and what do Americans like to drink. And, she stands behind Americans prefer a drier sake. Whereas it was mentioned in the video as well, in Japan, sake is much more well-known. It's got a long history. People, have much more awareness about how to drink sake and different kinds of sake. So there it's more regional. For example, in Himeji, pickles, octopus, eel, and shellfish do pair well with a slightly sweeter sake. So you'll find that up in the Nihonkai or up in Fukushima area, the drier sakes do tend to pair well with their salty or preserved foods, say, a few hundred years ago, and then it's sort of developed like that regionally to match the food, just like wine. Imojochu from Kagoshima. Yes, Yuko-san. That's my favorite too. So I'm going to talk just briefly about differences in the distribution and pricing. So let's see. You can see here in California, it does come from the brewery. We either sell directly or through a distributor. We can sell to off-premise, so to speak, retail, and we can sell to on-premise restaurants. But state by state, it is different. Nevada, Washington, California all have their different liquor laws and restrictions. Whereas in Japan, actually, our brewery can only sell to retail, and then from retail, they sell to restaurants. It looks like I have that backwards. I do on-premise, off-premise. Sorry about that. And it's not restricted by prefecture. So throughout the country, they can distribute and sell widely the same. I was told by our head of sales in Japan that there is more of a price competition, of course, being a longer history and understanding of sake and so many more breweries to compete with regionally, that there is more of a price competition than, say, here in the US, where people don't know really how much sake should cost, or what really most people don't have a sense. But in general, both countries do base their pricing on classification, Daigenjo and Ginjos being higher, and Jumais and Futsushu being cheaper or less expensive. I'm just excited to get into the interactive part. Let's keep going. So this is our Toji in Japan. Here in the United States. Her name is Reiko Wade ne Shibiki. She is known to be the first female sake brewer in the United States, which is pretty cool. I took this picture of her today. She doesn't like having her picture taken, so disclaimer, but yeah, we love Reiko-san. She was born in Sapporo City and came to the US and began working in sake production in 1989. And when I was interviewing her for this, she said she started like completely entry level, making the koji, like doing all the hard work, steaming the rice. And basically she was working side by side with a lot of people who they didn't share a language, a lot of Spanish speaking coworkers. And she told me like they really couldn't communicate. So everything was just like gesture. And, she eventually worked her way up to being the plant manager. Reiko says her favorite part of the job is cooperation and teamwork that goes into making sake. And to be honest, it's still quite similar. We do have a lot of Mexicans and Salvadorians as part of our brewing team. So it's a very diverse group, as well as Japanese working there that are very dedicated. Some of the staff have been with us for more than 20 years, including Reiko. So it's a very dedicated team making sake here at Yaegaki USA. And I wanted to share Reiko's message. She says, you can drink Yaegaki Jumai and never get tired of it because it's smooth and goes well with all kinds of cuisine found here in America. So she's referring to that drier taste. Here is Sato-san, who is our Toji in Japan. He's from a local Himeji city. He did attend Tokyo University of Agriculture, and he's also been with Yaegaki since 1989. I just realized that. It's the same as Reiko-san. And when I talked to him, when I visited Japan, and he does come to the US usually about twice a year to help us out with different things. His mind is just like all this chemistry, controlling the fermentation, and beyond being in Japanese and talking about chemistry, it just like blows my mind. It's pretty cool. And Sato-san's message for us is don't be afraid to try sake outside of Japanese restaurants. Experiment and enjoy it with a variety of cuisines. So this does remind me of something that I remember Marcus said in his presentation. Marcus, I'll probably misquote it, so you can correct me, but it was something like, the only limit is between your ears. Is that what you said?
Yes, I said the only thing limiting sake is between our ears.
Yes.
Exactly right.
I love that. Yeah. So I feel like that's pretty much what Sato-san's saying, you know, just like people have this sort of notion of sake being this one thing that you have when you go to the Japanese restaurant. And it's so much bigger than that and so much more versatile and interesting. Yeah. So
I love the fact that both tojis basically have the same message. Drink sake with whatever you want to drink it with.
Whatever you want. Yes. Thank you, Marcus. Let's see. So I'm just going to quickly, because I see we're getting close to the end here. It's amazing how fast time flies. Is everyone else like, it's almost the end of the year? Oh my gosh, how did that happen? Right? You're like, what? That's how I feel about this presentation. So I'm going to quickly introduce a couple of our sakes. Sales plug here. This is from our domestic brewery. We have a Yaegaki draft. You can read all these things. I love the draft because it really does have this vivid taste because it is pasteurized only once. So I think you guys might know a little bit about the pasteurization. You can pasteurize right after the fermentation, store it, pasteurize before bottling. You can always skip one or both. So this one is shelf safe because we pasteurized it. We've stored it fresh and pasteurized right before bottling. So it does have this vivid, fresh taste. Definitely recommend it. It's called namachozo. And yeah, you can see it's great with sausages, gyoza, any of those kind of oily foods because it cuts right through it with the acidity. Here's its sister, so to speak. This is the Yaegaki Cloud. Nigori, of course. Are there any Nigori fans in the house? Go ahead and type it in the chat if you like your Nigori. So Nigoris are great with anything with a bit of texture or a bit of spice. They can really stand up to it, such as curry, barbecue, yakitori is great. This is definitely one of our popular ones. It's not too sweet. So if you're familiar with the sake meter value, it measures the sweetness and dryness. This is only a -11, which is quite moderate. And you see these two are using Calrose. This is a new sake that Yaegaki, a new sake brand, came up with in 2019 called Roga. What makes Roga special there? It's using Yamada Nishiki grown in California. So this is something they've only been able to do in the last 5 or 10 years. And it's basically elevating domestic sake by using a specific sake rice. So it's definitely very clean. It does get that nice fruity aroma during the fermentation. We're able to do that with this special rice. And this is a really delicious Daigenjo for an amazing price because it's that Yamada Nishiki grown here in California. So I definitely recommend it. A couple of sakes from Japan. I'll just move quickly through. The Kuroben is one of our classics. This is just your all together Jumai, one size fits all. You can have it 3 ways. Chilled, room temperature, or heated. The Yaegaki Select is a beautiful ginjo, and this is actually known as the Chardonnay of sakes because it's on the sweeter side, but you would compare it like you would a Chardonnay, oysters, mushroom risotto, anything with a lot of umami. It's really delicious. And then the Mu, which is one of them that I hope you guys prepared tonight. And quite frankly, I hope you've been drinking this the whole presentation. It would feel much better. I won't be judging. So namimasho, let's get our sakes ready if you haven't already, and let's do our tasting. So as a little fun to start, 3 Japanese words you need to know if you're drinking sake. So the first one, we all know this one. It is, go ahead and unmute yourselves, everybody, or type it into the chat. You know it, kanpai, right?
Kanpai.
Kanpai. So if you are drinking along with us, I see I have a question, so I'll save the question. Looks like we have a couple questions. So Marcus, are we going to do Q&A during the drinking? Is
that's up to you? You tell me how you want to do it, Sarah.
Let's do a few questions now. So I'm looking at the chat.
About the cloudy sake, since filtered, how is that considered? How do they get the cloudiness?
Yes, thank you. Good question. So basically Nigori is made just the same as our clear sakes, but it's when we press it. So during the pressing, we put the soup through a press, and then it's going to separate the rice leaves, the solid part, the actual rice, from the juice. And when we make nigori, we just allow some of those rice leaves, the actual rice, to remain, and that's what creates the cloudy sake. Marcus, if you want to make any other
so people call it unfiltered sake all the time, which I think I mentioned last week is not correct. Everything has to go through, quote, filtration, but in actuality, as Sarah just said, it's actually pressing it has to go through. But there is various ways of pressing, and some pressings allow some of the sediment that's in the tank to come through in a very fine filtered, kind of quote filtered process during pressing. That's what allows the various in cloudiness. So it is a cloudy sake, and that's there's various ways of doing it. Depends on the brewery, but as Sarah mentioned, it's still pressed. It's just allows some of it to come through.
Yeah. So if you want to impress your friends, you could say, what is the word I often say? Coarsely pressed.
Yeah, it sounds good.
It's not actually about the filtration, as you mentioned in yours. So we did a kanpai. And if you have, why did you choose the name Roga? Okay, good question. So that was from Yusuke-san, the 15th generation of the Hasegawa Yaegaki Brewing. He chose Roga. It does come from a poem. And in that story, it's about somebody who leaves their home, and on the way, he sort of gets lost and falls asleep, and he wakes up and sees the stars and he remembers where he's from. So that was part of the idea that, like, leaving Japan, coming to America, the second generation sake, but also remembering our roots and where we're from. And then there's this idea of using those techniques, but using California resources. And also Roga is easy to pronounce, right? For everybody. So it's short and sweet. Those are the reasons. So the second, did we drink the sake yet? No, I'm sorry, guys. So the sake that we kanpai'd is going to be the Yaegaki sake Jumai. This is our domestic sake. I think a lot of you are probably familiar with it. So if you're drinking along with us, please continue. This is one of our more drier medium body with a crisp acidic finish. It is 15% ABV. Some of the recommendations: pork cutlet, ramen, fatty fish, stir fry, but Jumais are so versatile. I mean, you could have this with almost any food because it has that umami, it has that acidic finish. You can match the temperature to your food, room temperature, chilled or warm. You know, there's really no wine you can do 3 ways like that. So it's extremely versatile and fun and interesting. What type of yeast is used to brew to achieve higher acidity? It's less about the yeast. It's about the fermentation process with the acidity. Am I correct, Marcus? Do you want to?
Yeah, you're correct. It's the yeast has a lot more to do with the aromatics. It's a little bit with the flavor, but the acidity has very much to do with how the koji is made and the process of the temperature control during fermentation. And again, sake acidity is always lower than wine acidity anyway. It's all relative, but it's during fermentation, as Sarah said.
Great, thank you. So umami is savory. It's considered the 5th taste. It was discovered by Japanese scientists last century, I believe. And basically it's that you can't get enough of something. So it's like gravy, mushrooms, fish, steak, tomatoes, parmesan. Those are all like really umami type foods, including sake. So you're doing well if you pair sake with something else that's umami. There's going to be a synergy. It's going to increase that savoriness, and it's just delicious. I like this Yaegaki sake more than mu. Oh, okay. Mu is very good, but too sweet for me. Yeah, that's interesting. And it's interesting to make an inquiry too with like our olfactory system and like what is actually sweet on the tongue versus sweet in the nose, right? Because the aroma is quite sweet, but then it's fun to sort of play around with that. But in America, definitely a lot of people really like our drier sakes. So you are not alone, Maki. Keep the questions coming. Quiz time. I don't know if we need to do this. Marcus already went over this in the beginning, so I'm just gonna. Here we just talked about it, right? It's the glutamates and amino acid and succinic acids that are found in shellfish. They contribute to umami. So someone asked about umami. That's what the chemistry behind it is. So after you try sake, the second word that you need to know, so we learned kanpai. The second word that you need to know is umai. So many of you are probably familiar with this word. Oishi, I think, is considered to be more textbook. But if you're in Japan or you ever watch those cooking shows, they're like, umai, umai. It's that like very like excited surprise, like they didn't know it was going to be delicious, but they totally.
Yeah, I agree, sir. It definitely needs the emphasis of emotion behind it. Umai. Something that, yeah.
You watch those shows, right? And you're like,
Oh, yeah.
So surprised, you know, like. So you're having sake kanpai umai. I hope that's what you're saying as you're drinking our sakes tonight. Everybody want to try saying umai? Go on then. Umai. Umai. Yeah, it's kind of that. Umai. So that's a good segue into our musake. This is our flagship from Japan. It's been around for about 30 years. And I do see a question, Tyler. I'm going to get to that. This is a Jumai Daigenjo. So you guys learned classifications come from the rice polishing. So this is considered the most polished Jumai Daigenjo. The aroma, I gave it away. But again, you try it. It does have a nice clean finish that comes from the Gohaku Mangoku. I wonder why it seems like some information's missing. Oh, I guess that was on the other slide. And I would like to serve this with, I love this on its own, quite frankly. It's great as an aperitif. It has enough characteristics and just flavor to stand alone, but it's also great with lighter foods, salads, sashimi, charcuterie. And this one you definitely want to have chilled. So I was asked to talk a little bit about serving vessels. I think the last two seminars, they're going to go more into it with the pairing and drinking, but you don't have to use these, right? These ochoko. In fact, they're not that easy to get your nose into smell. So definitely a wine glass or something with a wider rim is going to allow you to, or brim rather, really get in there, swirl it up, just like you do with wine and experience it that way. So we have a question from Tyler. It says, are there any differences in the equipment used for brewing US sake generally versus Japanese sake? No, we have the same equipment more or less. I think the chilling, the way we chill it might be a bit different, but from my understanding and seeing both sides, the buildings are quite different. Of course, in Japan, it's like this very old building, wooden inside. The koji room, but basically they are doing things the same way with the rice cooker, right? Our rice cooker is bigger. It's enormous here in the US, but like the koji beds and, you know, we get our yeast and koji from Japan. So that's why I didn't even mention about those microbes. We are truly doing things very similar. The bottling lines are a little different. Japan's is definitely a lot better, but yeah. It's typically, maybe Marcus, have you seen big differences? I mean, I don't know if
yeah, no, I agree. They use the same methods, the same equipment. Sometimes US breweries will purchase tanks or something that's available here because it's easier to get here and cost-wise a little bit less. I have seen breweries that ship tanks over from Japan as well. So I say a combination of both, but there's certain types of equipment that really need to come from Japan, but a lot of stuff can be sourced here, but it's really all the same. It's the process and how they do that is the same. And there's actually, as a side note, rice polishing machines. I don't know if Yaegaki has one internally, but it was invented in Hiroshima, but there's a very famous company in Texas that actually was producing rice polishing machines, and they're used in Sacramento today. So.
Nice. Yeah. We buy our rice already polished, so we don't do that, in our actual facility. So thank you for that. We have a question about shimpaku, the white core, the starchy white core of the Yamada Nishiki. Junko asks, is there any difference between California grown Yamada Nishiki and Hyogo? I don't know specifically about the starchy core. I do know that the Yamada Nishiki grown in California, of course, it's still sort of in its infant stages. There's only been so many seasons. It's definitely the same as the Calrose, like the grains are a little bit harder, a little drier. So we still have that the difficulty of permeant penetrating with the koji can. We still have that same issue. Marcus, do you know much about the?
Yeah, the characteristic of rice, if it's Yamada Nishiki, the characteristic is going to be the same carried over to different countries where it's grown. It's really, as you said, it's a matter of experience of farmers growing it and the climate and what water is available to them. So that can affect the hardness, but the basics of the characteristics of the rice are going to be consistent no matter where it's grown. But even in Japan, you have Yamada Nishiki grown in different areas that comes out slightly different, but the basics of the rice are the same.
Great, thank you. We have a question about the name of mu. So my understanding, well, mu does mean nothingness if you're familiar with the Japanese kanji. I like to think that nothing that's not essential has been added. So there's sort of that pure Zen quality to it. There is a story about the graphic that it represents the red bit atop, that's going to be the sun. And then the white middle is supposed to be like a Japanese traditional style house with the windows and the floor. And then the three white lines are people. And as you guessed it, the blue line is a river. So it's kind of a nice little story of like the natural elements coming together to make sake there. All right, let's see. Keep the questions coming. You guys already know that. Last but not least, the last word I want to review with you, everyone. When you finish sake, this is super important. You want another one, mo-i-pai. So we had pai, umai, moi-pai. Beautiful, they all rhyme, right? Moi-pai, one more, please. So I hope that you are going to continue to fill your cup and drink sake. These are some little, let's just get rid of that. And that's going to be it for me. I think we do have a couple more minutes. I know there's some announcements. If there's more questions, please bring them if I missed something.
We still have a little bit time, so if someone wants to ask question to Sarah or Marcus,
Can I jump in just for a
hand.
second? When you go to a restaurant and you see the sake that comes in a box, a lot of people, I think you kind of had a little note on that, Sarah, but a lot of people think that's just cheap hot sake, and I really don't want people to think that. It's Jumai sake that's very economical for the restaurants, and it's the same sake that comes in bottles. It's just in a different format to make life a little easier for the restaurants. So please don't think it's, cheap hot. That's why it has to be served hot. That's a fib. That is not true. It's just nice to enjoy warm sake from time to time. So
another myth busted. Mythbusters. Let's take this show on the road. That's right. Thank you for mentioning that, Marcus. It is a myth that hot sake is cheap. Because absolutely in Japan they drink warm sake. It's just personal choice. Does anybody have anything they want to share about what they noticed or something from their tasting?
Yeah, if you have something, just raise hands.
Oh, those.
somebody died today.
They're busy drinking. They're both very good. Thank you.
All right, so
One quick thing, and also like Nagore sake, just be sure to shake your bottle before you pour it because you want it mixed up well. And sometimes people think you have to have this with sweet food, but you know what? I've had it with nice spicy food as well, and it actually can be really versatile as well. So don't be afraid to try it with a lot of different things as well as the regular sake.
right, so it's almost 7 o'clock. So thank you, Sarah. It was very, very informative seminar. And Marcus, thank you so much for supporting her. And everyone, I would like to announce that we will have the next webinar on Thursday, January 20th at 6 p.m. Our next main instructor is celebrity chef Mutsuko Soma. She owns the soba restaurant and sake bar Hanyato in Seattle, and she will demonstrate cooking of appetizers that go well with sake. Mr. Inagaki, Japanese Consul General in Seattle, will be her assistant in the cooking show. We would appreciate your interest in purchasing one or all of the bottle of sake, Sakari Jumai Ginjo, and Kenbishi if you have the chance. Please call or visit Hanyato or Uwajimaya, Seattle, or Portland. Well, thank you so much for your attending today. We hope you enjoy our seminar. Thank you, Marcus and Sarah.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Much.
Have a good night.